If you are interested in exploring these topics further, learning and connecting with like-minded individuals, check out the 3 Patreon discussion groups available. Just visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com and click the participate button. I also offer a free meditation group online every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just go to any of my social media profiles for the link found in my link tree. There's no pressure to be on camera or to actively participate in any of these groups. Just come and listen and enjoy. Join an online spiritual community of everyday people committed to understanding the human experience more deeply through spiritual practices that we can apply to our everyday lives. Join us. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we're talking about one of the most fascinating figures in the world of consciousness exploration, Robert Monroe. So if you've ever been curious about out-of-body experiences, astral projection, the technology behind binaural beats, or whether or not any of this is real, this is the episode for you. I myself have a history with using Robert Monroe's gateway experience and obviously the use of binaural beats, which you can find on my YouTube channel. But I found them both to be incredibly helpful, especially when it came to taking on a heavier meditation practice. In fact, looking into the gateway experience and watching the driest videos in the world about the Monroe Institute's audio technology is what taught me about binaural beats, which is what spurred me on to create my own. Incidentally, not only can the binaural beats that I've created be found on my YouTube channel, but they will also be included in the upcoming app that is in development as we speak. Also, episode 177, Spiritual Rebellion Part 2, is a free binaural beat that you can find on the Infinite Spark of Being YouTube channel as well. So I discovered the gateway experience in 2010, thereabouts. It was around the time that I started the Infinite Spark of Being blog on Tumblr. Yes, this was a Tumblr blog, and no, I was not a 19-year-old goth girl with an anime obsession, scratching my boyfriend's name into my inner thigh. I was actually a 34-year-old graphic designer sitting in a gray cubicle in an open office environment, screaming in my own head and falling asleep sitting up at my desk due to a lack of sleep because I hated my life, so I guess it's the same. But either way, I had heard of this technology, and since the cost of the CDs at the time was pretty high, I went onto the famed Pirate Bay website and just grabbed the torrents and downloaded them into my iPod Shuffle. And for those of you that don't know what an iPod Shuffle was, just know that it fucking ruled. I loved it. God, I loved my iPod Shuffle. So what I would do is eat my lunch at my desk at about 11 a.m. and then go sit in my car at 12 for my lunch hour. And I'd listen to the gateway experience and have these really deep meditative experiences, which I'll talk about later. But anyway, more about Robert Monroe. So Monroe wasn't just some guy who thought he was leaving his body. He developed a method for others to experience it too. It's one thing to say that you've done it. It's another thing when you can figure out how to teach others to have similar, if not the same experiences. Think about that. Think about what that means. That's a really big deal. And that's exactly why the CIA was so interested in him and what he was doing. And this research he was doing in the beginning is what laid the groundwork for what we now know as the gateway experience. So for those of you that have maybe never heard of it, it's a program designed to help people expand their consciousness beyond the physical body through these audio frequencies. We're going to get into how it all started, how he developed the technology that allows others to achieve these altered states, and how his work even caught the attention of the CIA, obviously. Which can be a red flag for some. But yeah, the CIA was studying Robert Monroe and his methods. And in case you're interested, some of those documents have been declassified. So we'll talk about all that, plus his encounters with non-physical beings, his philosophy on consciousness, and how his experiences align with other spiritual paths. It's yet another piece of the puzzle of figuring out what is true and what is just probably religious dogma. So let's get into it. Robert Monroe was a very successful businessman. Nothing particularly mystical about his background. Born in 1915, he actually started out in radio broadcasting and later got into producing corporate training programs, which is hilarious. I don't know if you've ever had to watch any of these sorts of things, corporate training programs, but they're pretty awesome when it comes to unintentional comedy. Well, something very unexpected began happening to Robert in the 1950s. He started having spontaneous out-of-body experiences. And when I say spontaneous, I mean he did not ask for this. He would suddenly find himself floating above his body, completely conscious, able to see his physical body lying there asleep. This was happening at night. And this obviously freaked him out. He thought he was dying or maybe going crazy. He went to doctors, psychologists, anyone that might have an explanation. And guess what? Nobody had one. His health was fine. His brain scans were normal, but he kept leaving his fucking body. Now, had this happened nowadays, right, they'd prescribe him some fucking pill that would have probably put a stop to it. It would have dulled him into staying right here in the meat suit like a good boy, do your prescribed state-approved job, pay your taxes, shut the fuck up. Well, eventually, thankfully, Monroe stopped resisting and started exploring. He realized that he could move through walls, travel to different locations, and even interact with other beings. And once he accepted that this was real, at least real in the sense he was having repeatable experiences, he started documenting everything. And thank God he did. Most people have no idea how much this man really changed our culture. He was a true visionary. And if you look up a picture of him, he was just a regular guy. No costume. You'll notice most people that are actually engaged with the phenomenon are not the people you'd pick out of a lineup, right? They don't look like they're headed to Burning Man in their white turban because they're going to be hosting a Kundalini yoga sound bath in a tent in the desert. Anyway, all of this led him to a lifelong mission, figuring out how to control these experiences and helping others do the same. And this is the difference in the folks that want to help and those who want to be the one that helps. That is a distinction that will save you a lot of time on your journey. Trust me. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Monroe wasn't just satisfied with experiencing spontaneous out-of-body states. He wanted to understand how and why they happened. And more importantly, he wanted to find out a way to control them. This is the benefit of these things happening to someone like him. He was a logical thinker. And you know, it's funny. People with more liberal spiritual leanings always want to decentralize this and decentralize that. But when it comes to spirituality, no, that's not for everyone. And if you're one of these people and you're listening to this, just know that you would never be able to pick me out of a lineup as someone with the deep history that I have. You'd see me on a run or at Whole Foods. You'd see a 48-year-old man that looks like you do a pull-up and probably outrun you, and you'd snub me, as they always do, without knowing that I, too, am deeply familiar with Leonard Peltier and Mumia Abu-Jamal. I had the t-shirts as well. It's okay. I'm safe. Relax. You'd never know. You'd never suspect it. I always find that the most liberal among us tend to be the most hard-lined and uptight. Again, this deeply spiritual stuff can't just happen to some flaky kid with dreadlocks living in a national park in a fucking Sprinter van feeding off a trust fund while he posts to his van life Instagram feed. It can also happen to Robert with a mustache and a sweater vest. And thank God it did, so that we can begin studying it. But don't you think it's better to feel it? Yeah, but it's also good to know what the fuck is actually happening so that you don't end up creating a dogmatic religion based on belief. We've done that. It's not working out well. So, and look, this is why Robert Monroe is special. He didn't think that what was happening to him was special and didn't think that he was special. He saw it as a phenomenon that needed to be understood. And when we don't understand these things and put them on a pedestal as being magical or special, we end up with religions or only slightly worse, cults, right? And thank God he didn't think he was someone special or some anointed being. Christ, if it had happened to one of the aforementioned characters living in a Sprinter van in today's culture, where everyone thinks that they just deserve attention, fame, followers, and money, that would have maybe started a fucking YouTube channel or a TikTok page where they begin speaking in some fake Enochian language of light. And we wouldn't know jack shit about any of this stuff. We'd be stuck with just another quote unquote special person. Anyway, sorry, back to Robert. So at first he tried all the usual approaches, relaxation techniques, meditation, breath work, but none of it produced consistent results. Let me say that again. None of it was consistent. Breath work wasn't consistent. Meditation wasn't consistent, probably because there are way too many variables. Everything he tried was unpredictable. And I understand what he was trying to do. And I don't really think that it had to do so much with predictability as much as I think it had to do with proof. Sometimes when really anomalous things happen, there's this feeling of doubt. Like, did I just see that? Or did that just happen? And if you can find a way to predict it, figure out the causes and conditions that produce the experience and make it recreatable, then two things can happen. One, you will know you're not crazy. You will be positive that you saw what you saw. And that makes sense if you think about it from an evolutionary psychological standpoint. Two, you can now share the experience with others. And a side effect of that will be that now they won't think you're crazy. So that's when he started thinking scientifically. He thought, what if these altered states were connected to specific brainwave activity? And this led Monroe to dive into brainwave research, studying how different states of consciousness, wakefulness, dreaming, deep meditation were associated with distinct electrical patterns in the brain. He realized that if he could manipulate these brainwave frequencies, he might be able to reliably induce an out-of-body experience on command. But, how do you influence brainwaves without using drugs or extreme sensory deprivation? That's when Monroe's background in radio broadcasting came into play, right? He already had a deep, deep, deep understanding of sound frequencies and how they interact with the brain. And he knew that rhythmic auditory stimulation, things like drumming and shamanic rituals, chanting, or even certain types of music had been used for centuries to alter consciousness. So he started experimenting with different sounds, frequencies, tones. Now, I want you to think about something for a minute. I've brought up this type of thought exercise before, but think about this. He didn't live in the age of Google, YouTube, TikTok, or any way to search anything other than the library, encyclopedias, and other experts. I myself am old enough to remember this time as in my own journey that it started at the library, right? There wasn't a way to just use a pocket-sized supercomputer for any of this stuff. You had to think, you had to read, you had to be patient. The answers didn't just jump out at you. And it goes back to what I said about the early days of rock and roll. There wasn't rock and roll to listen to for reference, right? The sounds were new. We have to appreciate these visionaries, like you go to a yoga class or a sound bath thing or whatever, it isn't that strange. But if you did that in the early 1960s or even in the 1950s, that would have been a real what the fuck is this moment. In fact, you might end up on a fucking list, and that's no joke. So don't forget that as we go through all of this stuff. So when Robert started working with sound engineers and neuroscientists in the early 1960s, they stumbled upon a fascinating phenomenon: binaural beats. Binaural beats work by playing two slightly different frequencies in each ear. Your brain processes the difference between them and creates a third frequency inside your mind, a rhythmic pulse that naturally shifts brain activity into altered states. So through trial and error, Monroe and his team found that specific binaural beat patterns could induce deep relaxation, expanded awareness, and even trigger out-of-body experiences. And this discovery was huge. So instead of relying on years of meditation practice or psychedelic substances, people could now use sound to shift their consciousness almost effortlessly. Trauma responses, anxiety, ruminating thinking, grief and loss, stress, these are all reoccurring patterns in the mind. They're often the result of reacting the same way over and over again. Why do we do this? Because the mind believes the past is still here, happening now, causing the nervous system to respond accordingly. What the mind perceives, the body feels. Mind Transformation and Restructuring, MTR, offers a pathway to release these patterns. It guides both the mind and the nervous system out of these repetitive cycles and into a lighter, freer way of being. If this resonates with you, feel free to reach out via direct message or through the contact section at theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. You don't have to live the way you've been living. Change is possible. So by the early 1970s, this technology had evolved into what Monroe called Hemi-Sync, short for hemispheric synchronization. This is how I was first introduced to all this. I downloaded some Baroque chamber music that used Hemi-Sync in the music. And my first experience with it freaked me out so much that I took my headphones off and didn't try it again for a few days. It scared me because I experienced this loss of bodily awareness, which was something I'd only experienced one other time, and it was during a day-long meditation workshop. A day-long meditation workshop. But when I listened to this Hemi-Sync thing, it happened within like a minute and a half or something of listening to the music. I remember looking down at the track. And what I found later was that this system used binaural beats to balance the activity between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And that puts the listener, the experiencer, into a highly receptive altered state. So Monroe was onto something. It was big, and he fucking knew it. If he knew that being able to induce this stuff through sound was a very big deal. So in order to support this research that he was getting into, Robert founded the Monroe Institute in 1974 in the mountains of Virginia, which became the hub for everything he was doing: scientific experiments, consciousness training, and later classified studies conducted by the CIA, which again, we'll get into later. Just wait. And then in 1975, he officially patented Hemi-Sync technology, and soon after that launched the Gateway Experience. The Gateway Experience is great because it's this very structured program designed to help people explore deep meditative states, states of altered consciousness and out-of-body travel by using sound frequencies. And this is what I would listen to. I'd sit in my car at lunch and do. I would go through all of these tracks every day. It was a great time in my journey. And at that point, I wasn't really at the Krishna temple as much. I was spending a lot of time with Lama Losan, but I was also getting my first look at the fact that these meditative experiences, methods, spiritual practice, whatever it was, these paths to God weren't centralized. No one had a monopoly on this stuff. Like I was saying, this guy didn't fit it. He didn't fit the bill of an enlightened being. He was a regular businessman with a mustache and a sweater vest. I don't know why I'm hung up on the sweater vest and the mustache, but I am. So again, each day I'd listen to a new recording or a new track at lunch, kind of making my way through the Gateway program. And to this day, I haven't ever been to the Institute and hadn't had anyone formally walk me through this stuff. But I really believe that one day I'll find myself there at the Monroe Institute. I have to do it. When Christy and I do these sorts of things together, shit seems to get wild. So I'd love for us to go and have a week of just getting weird at the Monroe Institute. So Monroe's discovery of the binaural beats revolutionized how people approached consciousness exploration. Instead of struggling with all the various traditional meditation things, his research was showing that sound could be a direct and reliable, the key word here is reliable, way to induce expanded states of awareness. Now, something I want to throw out. This was also the time for psychedelics. People were interested in consciousness. They were interested in expanding consciousness. The culture was finally like, wait a minute, this can't be it. There's got to be more. Now, this idea of using sound and technology might bristle some folks, and I can understand that. The idea of using tech to get into a meditative state instead of grinding it out on a meditation cushion can feel a bit dry. I understand that. But what it did for me was teach my brain, my body, my mind how to get to that place faster. It said, this is the place. Do you like this place? If so, here's a map. And look, I don't believe that this is meant to replace traditional meditation methods because it can't. I still believe that you need your traditional sitting practice because it strengthens your mind's ability to disregard thoughts and allows you space to train the mind toward different ways of thinking. You also need the literature piece too. When it comes to spiritual practice, you have to have that as well. You aren't going to simply experience an expanded state of consciousness and then change as a person. You know, the other day I went and saw Krishna Das do a workshop at a local yoga school, and he said something that more people need to hear. It's something that was really hammered home to me early on, and it was that you have to read about these great beings because it puts you in association with them. It's something that not enough people do. You know, we live in this world of you are the guru, and while that might be true to some extent, you aren't always ready to be your own guru. So reading about the pastimes of these great beings has always been a tradition and an integral part of the process. That's how I was taught. And I think it's something missing from this new age spirituality thing that people are engaged in the West. But Robert Monroe qualifies as one of these people. To understand where he was coming from and getting a feel for how he was thinking about all of this is extremely beneficial. You know, we're in this culture of quick fixes and hits rather than dedicated paths and things like that. And for better or worse, that's why binaural beats are so popular today. I mean, YouTube is filled with this shit. But none of these people really know who Monroe was. And if they do, they just kind of take a cursory glance at him and they don't really take a deeper look. He was a very interesting figure worth learning more about. Trust me. So anyway, Robert wasn't just running some fringe science experiment in his fucking basement. He was serious about this. Like I said earlier, in 1974, he created the Monroe Institute. Right? He was studying human consciousness. He developed the Gateway program, it was working, right? It was all going well. And that's why the government was interested. And the government only gets interested unless they can weaponize it. So in the 1970s and 80s, the CIA was investing a lot into the study of psychic phenomenon. They wanted to find a way to bring love and understanding into the human incarnation. They just wanted us to be better humans so that we may transcend this incarnation at the time of our death. Just kidding. They knew that the Russians were doing it and they didn't want to miss out. They were trying to weaponize it and spy on people. So they had a program called Project Stargate. You can read about it, that focused on remote viewing, which is the ability to see locations or events without being physically present. There's some okay documentaries on the topic, but they all inevitably get weird. However, there is a very multi-hour interview on the Sean Ryan show with this gentleman right here, the most successful psychic spy, drumroll please, Joseph McMoneagle. He is probably the most famous remote viewer to come out of this program. He was deeply connected to Monroe. He actually married Robert Monroe's daughter. And if you don't know, McMoneagle was the guy that the U.S. Army used for intelligence gathering through remote viewing, and he trained extensively at the Monroe Institute. He was the man. He didn't start at Monroe, but he got a lot of his training there. He's a fascinating guy, and the interview I mentioned on the Sean Ryan show is really good. It's in his own words. It's him talking. It's not turned into some airy-fairy thing. It's very cut and dry. So what did the CIA think of Monroe's work? Well, a declassified document called the Gateway Process details how the government analyzed the Gateway experience and found it credible. Well, no shit. They believed that Monroe's methods could allow people to access altered states where they could gather intelligence or influence reality on a quantum level. And that's fucking wild to think about. The CIA literally studied this and took it seriously. So that adds a level of interest to something like this for me. I mean, I don't think of a government agency as a benchmark for legitimacy, nor do I think they're experts in spending money on legitimate projects. But I think it's interesting. I always think it's fun when these fucking dorks get hit with something super paranormal that can't be denied. So I guess for me, on some level, it's validation. Like, okay, so I'm not just imagining these experiences. Like I've said, it's important to be skeptical, right? But not cynical. The only reason I say that is out of this fear that if I accept everything at face value, then I'm not really going to be looking for truth with a capital T. You know what I mean? If I'm just accepting every wacky thing out there, then I'm just being thoughtless and lazy. And if I'm dismissing everything, I'm being thoughtless and lazy. But a level of skepticism when it comes to this path, this act of seeking is hard. Because sometimes you have to abandon ideas that you really wanted to be true. And that being said, one of the things that Monroe documented extensively was his encounters with other beings while in his out-of-body states. He described meeting non-human entities. Some of them were neutral, some were wise, benevolent. That could fall under angels and devas. And some felt indifferent or even slightly malevolent, right? Rakshasas, Nagas, the jinn, nature spirits. All of these descriptions can be cross-referenced in the spiritual literature. Now, if you've ever read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this is going to sound familiar. That text describes many realms or bardos and beings that one might encounter after death or even in deep meditation. And Monroe's experiences aligned with a lot of that. It's as if there's a map of consciousness that different traditions have been exploring for centuries. Monroe just happened to approach it with a scientific mindset. So after years of exploration, what did Monroe actually learn? Well, one of the biggest realizations was that we are not our physical bodies. He came to see human life as just one small part of a much larger existence. He believed that consciousness continues beyond death and that we are all connected to something greater. The same old thing. He called this greater reality, though, he called it I there, as in I-there, which is kind of like a higher self that's aware of all of our timelines and experiences. The closest thing it could be would be the Buddhist idea of the stored subconscious, or the concept of the luminous, clear light mind in Vajrayana Buddhism, that clear light that we are all part and parcel of. He never started a belief system or anything like that. He was just kind of saying this is part of our natural world. He didn't form a belief system really. Robert also learned this very important piece, something I had to learn, that fear is one of the biggest barriers to experiencing expanded consciousness. Many people resist these experiences because of fear of death, fear of losing control, fear of the unknown. As I said in the beginning, the first time I tried Hemi-Sync, it scared me. I lost all bodily awareness and could have sworn that I heard voices in the room. It took me forever to just have these experiences and not be afraid of them. I've mentioned in the past in other episodes that at times it was hard for me to stay in the state where these things are happening. I really had to learn to let go and become fearless, because there was always a piece of me that felt like I was dying or afraid that I would die. It's not a rational thought, but it's there. And yes, I hear the deeper meaning of that statement, so I'll just say it. There's a piece of you that is dying in those moments of mystical experience, but that piece of you that dies isn't really you. It's a shift in perception that changes, an expansion in consciousness that feels like death to the mind. Remember, the mind believes that everything is fixed and stable. So when things are forced to change or threatened with change, it tells the nervous system that there's danger and that it could all end. But once you let go of that fear, once you learn to disregard the mind's stories and the nervous system's feelings, the universe opens up in a way that you never imagined. So Robert Monroe didn't set out to be a mystic. He was just a guy who started having strange experiences and wanted to understand them. And fortunately, in doing so, he created a system that has helped thousands of people expand their consciousness and explore the nature of reality itself. The Monroe Institute is still open, and his books are still available. His books are Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and The Ultimate Journey. And they are, in my opinion, the only legitimate resources of out-of-body experiences. Robert Monroe was a fearless explorer that should be regarded as such. I love you. I love you. I love you. Thank you for keeping me here. And thank you for keeping me on track. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you enjoyed this content and would like to support its creation, visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. There you can explore the various ways to get involved and support this work. Click the About button, read a little bit about me, and see what I have to offer you through the one-on-one sessions. Don't forget to check out the Patreon tiers, where we're building a community of everyday people with not-so-everyday interests. You'll also find the online apparel store. And as always, head over to the Participate button and join us. Together, we're growing a community of spiritual seekers just like you.